Scientists just solved the Dead Sea Bible mystery no one could explain. Until now. For centuries, a shadow hung over one of history's greatest mysteries. Could the Bible we know today have hidden secrets buried in ancient texts? Now, scientists claim to have cracked a puzzle that baffled historians for generations. Their discovery sent shockwaves through the world of biblical scholarship, forcing experts to rethink everything they thought they knew about how sacred writings were preserved and passed down over millennia. Discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea has always held a special place in history, not just for its unique landscape, but for its deep biblical significance. Mentioned many times in ancient scriptures, it is tied to stories of faith, judgment, and survival. The region around its shores is believed to be near ancient settlements described in the Bible, including the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah and the area where the prophet Ezekiel delivered his visions. For centuries, scholars and believers alike have regarded the Dead Sea as a treasure trove of religious history, a place where the past seems to whisper through the winds across its salty waters. In 1947, a young shepherd boy was tending his flock near the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea when he noticed something unusual. Curiosity led him into a hidden cave, and inside he discovered jars carefully tucked away in a dark corner. These jars contained scrolls so old and fragile that no one could immediately imagine the secrets they held. This accidental discovery would soon become one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century, changing the way the world understood ancient texts and the history of the Bible. Over the next few decades, archaeologists explored the area around the Dead Sea and uncovered more manuscripts in 11 caves, and possibly more beyond those initially found. Thousands of fragments were collected, representing hundreds of original manuscripts. Some scrolls were complete and remarkably preserved, while others existed as tiny pieces, almost impossible to piece together. Each fragment became a puzzle, offering glimpses into the thoughts, beliefs, and writings of communities. The discovery immediately transformed biblical studies. For the first time, scholars could hold in their hands texts that predated many known versions of the Bible. The scrolls included familiar books like Isaiah, Psalms, and Deuteronomy, as well as writings that had been lost to history. They offered a rare glimpse into the beliefs, practices, and interpretations of Jewish communities in the Second Temple period. Beyond their textual value, the scrolls showed how the Bible evolved over time and how religious communities preserved their sacred writings through periods of turmoil. Yet, what exactly was in this ancient library? Only the familiar Bible, or more? The answer was about to challenge everything people assumed about the contents. What scrolls contain? Dating from roughly the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, the scrolls represented texts that were over 2,000 years old. This timing was remarkable because, before their discovery, the oldest known Hebrew Bible manuscripts dated from much later periods. The scrolls pushed back the physical evidence for biblical texts by centuries, showing that the core of what became the Old Testament canon already existed long before the Common Era. This discovery challenged long-standing theories that some biblical books had been later forgeries or additions from the Christian era. Within the collection, many books of the Hebrew Bible were present, including canonical texts, though interestingly, almost nothing from the Book of Esther survived. Yet the scrolls were far richer than just scripture. They contained sectarian writings, outlining rules for religious communities, commentaries on biblical books such as Isaiah, Habakkuk, and Psalms, apocryphal works that were not included in the later canon, and liturgical texts, including hymns and songs used in worship. The scrolls also featured legal and ethical writings, reflecting a broad view of religious life, devotion, and daily practice far beyond simple copying of sacred texts. The Great Psalm Scroll was one of the clearest and best preserved manuscripts of Psalms, while the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice revealed detailed instructions for ritual worship and liturgical practices. This variety indicated that the scrolls were not just for study, they were used for community worship, instruction, and maintaining the identity and beliefs of the groups that kept them. Scholars widely believed that one of these groups was the Essenes, a Jewish sect living near Qumran, though it was possible that multiple communities contributed to the scrolls. Each manuscript added a layer of understanding to the social, spiritual, and theological world of these ancient people. The preservation of these scrolls in hidden caves remained one of their most intriguing mysteries. They were deliberately concealed, suggesting that the communities feared destruction, conflict, or cultural loss. Their placement in the cliffs and dry caves of the Dead Sea region protected them for centuries, yet also left a question that puzzled scholars for generations. But if these scrolls were more than a simple archive of sacred texts, why were they hidden in caves? The purpose behind their concealment held a mystery that centuries of scholarship struggled to solve, hinting at dangers, secrets, and beliefs that extended far beyond what the scrolls themselves revealed. Why hide them? Mystery of Qumran. The site of Qumran had always been unusual, raising questions that puzzled archaeologists for decades. Located near the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, Qumran included a large open-air terrace known as the Southern Esplanade, situated close to several ritual baths, or mikvaot. Interestingly, this terrace was separated from a nearby cemetery by a wall, suggesting careful planning and specific religious purposes. Qumran itself had a long and fascinating history. The site showed evidence of occupation during the Second Temple period, roughly from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. Scholars believed it had been home to a Jewish sect, possibly the Essenes, who lived communally and dedicated themselves to strict religious observance. Excavations revealed simple dwellings, pottery workshops, and communal facilities, indicating a society organized around shared religious life. The presence of ritual baths suggested a strong emphasis on purification, a practice central to their spiritual beliefs. The architecture and layout reflected a community that balanced daily living with religious devotion, and its proximity to the Dead Sea made it both remote and defensible. An influential theory proposed by researcher Daniel Vainstube offered a compelling explanation for the scrolls themselves. He suggested that Qumran functioned as a gathering place for a mystical religious sect, likely the Essenes. Members of this sect reportedly came together annually for a major ritual festival, sometimes called a covenant renewal. During this festival, scrolls from various communities across the region had been brought to Qumran to be read, studied, worshipped, and stored. This practice explained the site's unusual features. The large baths were used for ritual purification, the open terrace accommodated communal gatherings and meals, and the caves became a practical place to safeguard scrolls from different origins. The theory also shed light on the diversity of the scrolls themselves. They were not all produced at Qumran, but had been collected from multiple communities, reflecting a broader religious culture and a shared reverence for sacred texts. The scrolls showed variations in wording, style, and interpretation, suggesting that ancient communities had slightly different versions of the same scriptures, as well as unique commentaries and writings tailored to their own practices. While preservation and protection likely played a role, the careful concealment hinted at a deeper concern, perhaps fear of conflict, invasion, or cultural loss. The Qumran community may have been aware that these manuscripts were precious and vulnerable, deserving the safest place they could find. If the scrolls had come from across the region, this raised profound questions about the Bible itself. Were there competing versions of sacred texts? Did ancient communities interpret Scripture differently? The answers began to challenge the long-held assumption that the Bible had always existed in a single uniform form, hinting at a more dynamic and diverse textual history than scholars had imagined. Evidence that the Bible once existed in multiple versions. New research, including advanced DNA analyses of parchment, revealed surprising details about the origin of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Scientists discovered that some scrolls had been written on calfskin rather than the more typical goat or sheepskin used in the Judean desert. This suggested that certain manuscripts had originated outside the desert region and had been deliberately brought to Qumran. The findings indicated that the scrolls represented a broader network of communities preserving and sharing sacred texts rather than a single local collection. The scrolls also revealed notable textual variations. For example, two fragments of the book of Jeremiah found among the scrolls differed from each other, demonstrating that multiple versions of the same biblical text had coexisted at the time. These differences were not minor scribal errors but reflected distinct textual traditions circulating simultaneously. The evidence made it clear that the biblical text was not monolithic. Instead, the Dead Sea Scrolls captured a snapshot of a dynamic, living scripture before later processes of standardization had unified the text into the form familiar today. For many scholars and religious believers, this raised profound and uncomfortable questions. If the text had varied across different communities, how had the version that ultimately became the standard been chosen? What factors had driven the process of standardization, and at what point in history had it occurred? The discovery highlighted that the Bible, as it was known later, had been shaped over centuries through decisions, interpretations, and the interplay of multiple traditions. Yet this textual variation carried even deeper implications. If multiple versions had existed at the same time, it opened the possibility that the origins of these scriptures might stretch further back than previously thought. Modern scientific methods, from DNA testing to radiocarbon dating, could now push back the timeline of these texts, revealing a history even older and richer than scholars had imagined. The Dead Sea Scrolls, therefore, were not only a remarkable archaeological treasure, but also a window into the living, evolving nature of the biblical tradition. They showed a world where sacred texts were studied, debated, copied, and shared across regions, long before a single uniform Bible existed. But this variation also hinted at a greater mystery. The scrolls might yet reveal that the scriptures themselves were older than anyone had realized, rewriting the timeline of biblical history, rewriting biblical chronology with modern technology. Link. Recently, scientists applied a new AI-based handwriting analysis tool called Enoch to dozens of Dead Sea Scroll fragments, including many that had never been precisely dated. The results were surprising. The study suggested that numerous manuscripts previously thought to belong to the mid-1st century BCE during the Hasmonean or Herodian periods might in fact have originated in the late 2nd century BCE. This pushed back the estimated age of some texts by decades, challenging long-held assumptions based on traditional paleography and forcing scholars to reconsider the timeline of biblical history. By combining AI analysis with radiocarbon data and paleographic study, researchers created what they described as a time machine effect. This approach allowed for a more precise reconstruction of when parts of the biblical text and related writings were produced. The findings implied that some books of the Bible may have existed in their final or near-final form much earlier than scholars had previously believed. Texts once assumed to have been shaped in the 1st century BCE were now seen as potentially a century older, demonstrating that sacred writings were already carefully composed and transmitted long before previously estimated. If these results were accurate, the implications were profound. The standard Hebrew Bible, or at least its core portions, may have been established long before major historical events such as the Roman conquest of Judea or the destruction of the Second Temple. This reshaped understanding of how Jewish scriptures evolved and influenced interpretations of early Christian texts, revealing that many sacred writings were circulating in well-defined forms, centuries before the 1st century CE. It suggested that these communities had already created a shared textual tradition with established content, offering a clearer picture of religious continuity and preservation. The AI-driven research did more than refine dates. It offered insight into the historical reality of how Scripture had been produced and maintained. It indicated that the scribes and communities responsible for these texts had developed sophisticated methods of copying, organizing, and safeguarding their sacred writings. Their work ensured accuracy and durability across generations, long before the upheavals of the 1st century BCE and CE. The study revealed a world in which sacred texts were not static, but carefully curated, preserved, and transmitted by skilled and devoted individuals, highlighting both the human effort and communal commitment behind the survival of these ancient manuscripts. This discovery fundamentally reshaped our understanding of biblical chronology and the meticulous care with which early communities protected their spiritual heritage. But dating and chronological precision were only part of the story. the larger question remained: who had composed, copied, and safeguarded these writings, and why? The identity of the scribes, their techniques, and the communities behind the creation of the Bible were about to be revealed, opening a new chapter in understanding the human hands that shaped the sacred texts we know today. Who wrote the scrolls? Research combining AI, statistical methods, and pattern recognition, a field known as digital paleography, revealed remarkable insights into who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. Studies of manuscripts such as the Great Isaiah Scroll or 1Q Isaiah showed clear evidence that more than one scribe had worked on a single scroll. By analyzing ink trace patterns and the shapes of letters, researchers identified a distinct breakpoint in the manuscript. Columns before and after column 27 clustered differently in feature space, statistically indicating the presence of two separate scribes contributing to the same text. This finding challenged older assumptions that ancient biblical manuscripts had been created by a lone scribe. Instead, it revealed a scribal culture that was collaborative, systematic, and communal. Scribes were not isolated copyists, but members of organized networks, carefully preserving, copying, and transmitting sacred texts across generations. Their work demanded precision, discipline, and shared responsibility, showing that the production of Scripture was as much a collective human effort as it was a religious one. When combined with the archaeological context, the implications became even clearer. Many scrolls had been collected from across the region and may have been pooled during gatherings at Qumran. This suggested that the biblical text had been maintained not by isolated individuals, but by networks of scribes working in coordination. Communities of religious practitioners likely oversaw these processes, ensuring accuracy, continuity, and consistent interpretation across multiple manuscripts. The scrolls reflected a society deeply invested in its sacred texts. Writing, copying, and preserving Scripture were communal acts carried out with a sense of devotion and purpose. These discoveries revealed that the survival of biblical texts depended on collaboration and meticulous effort, highlighting a human dimension behind the transmission of what many consider divine Scripture. Ultimately, the study of scribal hands opened a window into the world of the Dead Sea communities. It showed that sacred texts were not only carefully maintained, but also that their preservation relied on shared responsibility, collective memory, and organized practice. The scrolls stand as a testament to the intricate human networks that safeguarded religious heritage, revealing a rich and complex history behind the words that have shaped faith for millennia. But if the scribes were many, and the texts showed variation, another question emerged. Did the scrolls contain prophecies or writings that aligned with events that occurred centuries later? The next revelations would challenge traditional ideas about faith, history, and the interpretation of Scripture, showing that these ancient texts held mysteries far beyond simple copying or preservation. One of the most powerful impacts of the Dead Sea Scrolls related to prophecy. Among the scrolls were texts, such as a version of Isaiah, that clearly predated Christ by a century or more. These manuscripts included the famous suffering servant passages, like those in Isaiah 53, which many Christians interpreted as messianic prophecies. Because these scrolls had existed long before Christianity, they refuted claims that prophecies or certain biblical passages had been inserted later. They proved that at least some prophetic texts had already existed in their form centuries earlier, showing that these writings were genuinely ancient and part of a living religious tradition well before the Common Era. Beyond prophecy, the scrolls provided compelling evidence for the continuity of the Hebrew Bible. They demonstrated that the core of the Old Testament had already been established and circulated in communities across Israel long before the events of the 1st century CE. This confirmed that the biblical tradition had been carefully preserved over generations, revealing a remarkable fidelity in the transmission of sacred texts. Communities took great care in copying, storing, and maintaining these writings, ensuring that the words of Scripture survived with minimal alteration over centuries. At the same time, the scrolls revealed that this preservation process was not entirely uniform. Multiple versions of certain books, such as variant texts of Jeremiah, showed that there had been no single canonical Bible at the time. Instead, the biblical text had existed as a fluid tradition, with different communities interpreting, copying, and sharing scriptures in slightly different forms. These variations captured a dynamic process in which sacred texts evolved, were debated, and were adapted according to local practices and theological perspectives. The scrolls provided a rare glimpse into this transitional period before the eventual consolidation and standardization of the biblical canon. Taken together, the findings on early dating, variant manuscripts, collaborative scribal work, and careful preservation painted a vivid picture of how the Bible had come to be. They showed that the texts considered sacred today had been shaped by human hands within communities devoted to faith, accuracy, and transmission. The scrolls revealed the messy human and communal effort behind what many had assumed to be divinely perfect scripture. They highlighted the dedication, skill, and discipline that went into preserving these works over centuries, demonstrating that the survival of the Bible was as much a product of human care as of divine inspiration. Even after decades of study, new technologies continued to challenge assumptions about the scrolls. AI handwriting analysis, DNA testing of parchment, and digital paleography pushed the boundaries of what scholars could learn about origin, dating, and authorship. Questions remained about lost scrolls, unknown textual variants, and even missing books of scripture. The Dead Sea Scrolls had answered many mysteries, yet they also left an open door to discoveries that could reshape our understanding of biblical history, prophecy, and preservation for generations to come. This combination of prophecy, continuity, and human effort confirmed that the Bible had a long and complex history, one that blended divine message with human stewardship, leaving scholars with new mysteries to explore and new perspectives to consider. The Dead Sea Scrolls continue to reshape our understanding of biblical history and prophecy. What do you find most fascinating about these ancient texts? Share your thoughts in the comments below.